I am Lady Vesper, entirely at your service, widely known as the keeper of the filthy little secrets draped in silk and sipping champagne for breakfast. Today, we shall unearth the forbidden affair of the ever-so-precious Lady Evangeline Blackwood, whose reputation was untouchable, until a certain gentleman without pedigree walked through the front door. Brace yourselves, you won't believe the scandal I'm about to unveil. The year 1818 marked a pivotal moment in English aristocratic society, where the rigid social hierarchies of the Regency period held absolute dominion over every aspect of noble life. In the sprawling estates of Northumberland, where ancient bloodlines traced their heritage back to Norman conquests, the delicate balance of power rested upon unspoken rules, carefully orchestrated marriages, and secrets buried deeper than family crypts. The morning mist clung to the manicured gardens of Ravenshollow estate like gossamer veils, shrouding the Georgian mansion in an ethereal beauty that belied the tempestuous drama about to unfold within its marble halls. Built in 1762 by the 3rd Duke of Blackwood, the estate stood as a monument to aristocratic supremacy, its Palladian architecture commanding respect from every corner of the county. Ionic columns supported a grand portico where carriages bearing the crests of the finest families in England regularly deposited their distinguished passengers for elaborate social gatherings that often determined the fate of entire dynasties. Lady Evangeline Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the morning room, her reflection ghost-like against the hand-blown glass that had witnessed 3 generations of Blackwood women contemplating their carefully predetermined destinies. At 24, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that poets struggled to capture in verse: auburn hair that caught fire in candlelight, emerald eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, and a porcelain complexion that spoke of noble breeding and careful protection from the harsh realities of common life. Her morning dress of pearl grey silk, trimmed with delicate Brussels lace, marked her as a woman of impeccable taste and substantial fortune. Yet the melancholy that shadowed her features suggested a soul yearning for something far beyond the confines of her gilded existence. The Blackwood lineage stretched back 7 centuries, their coat of arms bearing the inscription "Honor through Sacrifice," words that had guided every generation through wars, political upheavals, and the complex machinations of court life. As the only surviving child of the late Duke, Evangeline carried the weight of this legacy like a crown of thorns, her every decision scrutinized not only by society but by the ancestral portraits that lined the corridors of Ravenshollow, their painted eyes seeming to follow her with expressions of expectation and judgment. The estate itself served as a microcosm of the broader social order that governed English aristocracy. Below stairs, a carefully orchestrated hierarchy of servants maintained the seamless operation of daily life, from the imposing butler Harrison, whose family had served the Blackwoods for 4 generations, to the youngest scullery maid who scrubbed pots in the pre-dawn hours. Each knew their place, their duties, and the consequences of overstepping boundaries that had been established long before their births. In the Grand Library, where leather-bound volumes chronicled centuries of family history, the current crisis facing the Blackwood dynasty lay spread across an ornate mahogany desk in the form of legal documents, financial reports, and correspondence from the family solicitors. The death of Evangeline's father 6 months prior had revealed the precarious nature of the family's position. Substantial debts accumulated through poor investments, and the previous Duke's gambling losses threatened not only their social standing but their very survival. The entailment that governed inheritance meant that without a male heir, Ravenshollow and its vast holdings would pass to a distant cousin whose character and intentions remained questionable at best. Society matrons whispered behind their fans at every gathering, speculating about Lady Evangeline's future with the kind of morbid fascination that the privileged classes reserved for the downfall of their peers. Mrs. Pemberton, whose own daughters had made advantageous matches to titled gentlemen, took particular pleasure in cataloguing the various scenarios that might befall the Blackwood heiress. Would she be forced to accept a marriage of convenience to restore the family fortunes? Might she be compelled to retreat to a modest cottage in the countryside, living on the charity of distant relatives? Or would some unforeseen scandal provide the final blow that would topple the ancient house of Blackwood from its lofty perch? The morning routine at Ravenshollow followed patterns established by generations of aristocratic custom. Servants moved through the halls with practiced silence, lighting fires in marble fireplaces, polishing silver that bore the family crest, and preparing the elaborate meals that marked the rhythm of noble life. In the kitchen, Cook supervised the preparation of delicacies that would grace tables already set with Sèvres porcelain and crystal glasses that caught the light like captured rainbows. Every detail reflected the exacting standards that separated the nobility from their social inferiors, standards that could not be maintained much longer without a dramatic change in circumstances. Lady Evangeline's personal maid, Sarah, had served the family since her 14th birthday, and her devotion to her mistress bordered on the maternal. As she arranged Evangeline's jewelry in preparation for the day's activities, Sarah noticed the subtle signs of distress that no amount of powder or rouge could completely conceal. The slight tremor in her mistress's hands as she held her morning correspondence, the way her gaze lingered on the portraits of happier ancestors, and the increasing frequency with which she sought solitude in the estate's extensive gardens all spoke of a woman approaching a crossroads that would determine not only her own fate but the continuation of everything she held dear. The social calendar that governed aristocratic life in 1818 demanded constant participation in a complex web of obligations, entertainments, and carefully choreographed encounters designed to facilitate advantageous matches and maintain the intricate relationships that sustained the nobility's power structure. Invitation cards arrived daily at Raven's Hollow, their elegant script announcing dinners, soirees, musical evenings, and balls that served as the backdrop for the ongoing drama of English high society. Each event represented both an opportunity and a potential trap for a woman in Lady Evangeline's precarious position, where a single misstep could provide ammunition for those who sought to accelerate her family's decline. The weight of expectation pressed upon Evangeline like the heavy fabrics of her formal gowns, beautiful but constraining, designed to display wealth and status while limiting freedom of movement. She understood that her beauty, her title, and her remaining fortune made her a valuable commodity in the marriage market. Yet the thought of surrendering her autonomy to preserve a dynasty that might already be beyond salvation filled her with a desperation that she dare not reveal to anyone within her social circle. As the morning progressed and visitors began to arrive for the weekly drawing-room reception that custom demanded she host, Lady Evangeline prepared to don the mask of gracious hostility that aristocratic women wore as surely as their finest jewels. Little did she know that among the guests arriving in polished carriages and elegant equipages was a man whose presence would challenge everything she believed about duty, honor, and the price of preserving a noble legacy that might already be crumbling beyond repair. The afternoon drawing room at Raven's Hollow buzzed with the genteel conversation that marked the weekly social gathering, where ladies in afternoon dress of finest silk and gentlemen in impeccably tailored coats navigated the treacherous waters of aristocratic discourse. Servants glided between guests with silver trays bearing delicate china cups filled with the finest Darjeeling tea, alongside an array of petits fours and delicacies that spoke of refinement and substantial household budgets. The crystal chandelier cast dancing patterns of light across the assembled company, illuminating faces that wore the practiced expressions of those accustomed to public scrutiny and private calculation. Lady Evangeline moved through her guests with the grace that had been drilled into her from childhood, offering appropriate responses to inquiries about her health, the estate, and her plans for the upcoming London season. Behind her composed exterior, she calculated the true purpose behind each seemingly innocent question, understanding that every word would be dissected and analyzed by tongues that thrived on speculation and innuendo. Mrs. Whitmore's inquiry about the condition of the East Wing's roof carried implications about the family's financial stability, while Lord Pemberton's casual mention of eligible bachelors in the county suggested pressure for her to consider matrimonial options before her circumstances became truly desperate. The afternoon took an unexpected turn when Harrison announced the arrival of Mr. Alexander Sinclair, recently returned from the East Indies where he had spent 7 years building a fortune in trade and speculation. Unlike the hereditary nobility that comprised Evangeline's usual circle, Sinclair represented the emerging class of self-made gentlemen whose wealth and education purchased them entry into society despite their lack of ancient lineage. His arrival created a subtle but noticeable shift in the room's dynamics, as established families struggled to determine how to classify this newcomer who possessed obvious refinement yet lacked the bloodline credentials that typically granted automatic acceptance. Alexander Sinclair entered the drawing room with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command, his dark hair showing premature silver at the temples that spoke of years spent under foreign suns and the stress of building an empire through sheer determination. His clothing bore the unmistakable mark of London's finest tailors, yet something in his manner suggested experiences far removed from the pampered existence of English aristocrats. When their eyes met across the assembled guests, Evangeline felt an immediate and unsettling recognition, as though she had been waiting her entire life for this moment without knowing what she anticipated. The formal introduction conducted by Mrs. Pemberton followed all the prescribed protocols, yet the electric current that passed between them during the brief contact of gloved hands suggested possibilities that transcended social convention. Sinclair's voice carried hints of exotic places and dangerous adventures when he spoke of his travels, describing markets in Calcutta where fortunes changed hands faster than the monsoon winds, and palace intrigue in principalities where European traders walked the razor's edge between prosperity and peril. His stories captivated the drawing-room audience, yet his attention remained focused on Evangeline with an intensity that both thrilled and alarmed her. During the elaborate ritual of afternoon tea service, Sinclair positioned himself strategically to engage Evangeline in conversation that appeared casual to observing eyes while carrying undercurrents of meaning that left her breathless. He spoke of art collections acquired during his travels, describing sculptures and paintings that celebrated human beauty with a passion that would have been considered scandalous if expressed more directly. When he mentioned a particular marble statue of Venus that he had commissioned from an Italian master, his gaze lingered on Evangeline's face with an appreciation that made her acutely aware of herself as a woman rather than merely a social obligation. The other guests gradually departed as afternoon shadows lengthened across the Persian carpets, their carriages disappearing down the tree-lined drive that connected Raven's Hollow to the wider world beyond its boundaries. Yet Sinclair remained, citing his interest in the estate's famous library and the collection of rare manuscripts that had been assembled over generations of Blackwood scholarship. Evangeline found herself agreeing to provide a personal tour, despite the voice of propriety that whispered warnings about the dangers of spending time alone with a man whose intentions remained unclear and whose very presence seemed to awaken feelings she had carefully suppressed. The library at Raven's Hollow represented centuries of accumulated knowledge and culture, its floor-to-ceiling shelves housing first editions of literary masterpieces, historical chronicles, and philosophical treatises that had shaped Western civilization. Leather-bound volumes bore the marks of careful study by generations of educated aristocrats, while rare manuscripts in glass cases testified to the family's long tradition of patronage and scholarship. As Evangeline guided Sinclair through this repository of learning, she found herself sharing insights and observations that she had never expressed to anyone within her social circle, discovering in him an intellectual curiosity and depth of understanding that matched her own suppressed scholarly inclinations. Their conversation evolved from academic discourse to more personal revelations as they examined a collection of illuminated manuscripts that depicted scenes of courtly love from medieval times. Sinclair's commentary on the tension between passion and duty in these ancient stories carried contemporary relevance that neither could ignore, while his questions about her own aspirations and dreams opened emotional territories that Evangeline had long considered forbidden. When he asked whether she had ever wished to travel beyond England's shores, to experience the broader world that existed beyond the constraints of aristocratic society, she found herself admitting to longings that she had never acknowledged even in her private thoughts. The chemistry between them intensified as afternoon melted into early evening, their proximity in the intimate setting of the library creating opportunities for seemingly accidental contact that sent waves of awareness through Evangeline's carefully controlled composure. When Sinclair reached past her to retrieve a volume from a high shelf, the brief brush of his body against hers ignited sensations that she had read about in forbidden novels but never experienced in her sheltered existence. His cologne carried exotic notes of sandalwood and bergamot that spoke of distant places and dangerous adventures, while the warmth of his presence seemed to awaken parts of her nature that aristocratic conditioning had taught her to suppress. As they discussed a particular passage from a philosophical treatise on the nature of love and human connection, Sinclair's hand covered hers where it rested on the open book, his touch creating an electric contact that neither made any effort to break. The silence that stretched between them carried more significance than any words could have conveyed, while the growing shadows in the library seemed to create a private world where the rules that governed their external lives held no authority. In that moment, Evangeline understood that she stood at the threshold of a choice that would forever alter the trajectory of her carefully planned existence. The sound of servants preparing for dinner eventually penetrated their shared reverie, reminding them of the social obligations that awaited and the scrutiny that would attend any unusual behavior. Yet as Sinclair prepared to depart, he secured permission to call upon her again, citing his interest in continuing their discussion of the philosophical texts they had examined. The arrangement appeared perfectly proper to any observer, Yet both understood that they had embarked upon something far more dangerous than intellectual discourse, a connection that threatened to challenge everything they had been taught about duty, propriety, and the price of following one's heart in a world that demanded absolute conformity to established social norms. The Pemberton Ball 3 nights later represented the pinnacle of county social life, transforming the family's Georgian mansion into a glittering showcase of aristocratic elegance and carefully orchestrated romance. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a ballroom where the cream of English society gathered in their finest evening attire, the ladies resplendent in silk gowns of jewel tones adorned with family heirlooms, while gentlemen cut striking figures in black evening dress that emphasized the uniformity expected of their rank. The orchestra, imported from London specifically for the occasion, filled the air with melodious waltzes and country dances that provided the soundtrack for an evening of strategic socializing and romantic possibility. Lady Evangeline arrived fashionably late in a gown of midnight blue silk that had been crafted by the most celebrated modiste in London, its empire waist and flowing skirts creating a silhouette that emphasized her ethereal beauty while maintaining the modesty required of unmarried ladies. Sapphires that had belonged to generations of Blackwood women adorned her throat and ears, their deep blue fire complementing the gown while serving as visible reminders of her elevated status and substantial dowry. Yet beneath the confident exterior she presented to society, her heart raced with anticipation and anxiety as she searched the crowded ballroom for the one face that had haunted her thoughts since their encounter in the library. Alexander Sinclair commanded attention from the moment he entered the ballroom, his presence creating ripples of curiosity and speculation among the assembled guests, who remained uncertain how to classify this newcomer whose wealth and refinement could not be questioned yet whose pedigree remained a subject of intense debate. He wore his evening dress with a kind of natural elegance that spoke of supreme confidence rather than careful attention to fashion, while his manner suggested a man comfortable in any social setting yet somehow apart from the ritualized performances that characterized aristocratic gatherings. The formal presentations and social pleasantries that marked the early portion of the evening provided numerous opportunities for Evangeline and Sinclair to exchange meaningful glances across the crowded ballroom, each encounter building tension that threatened to become visible to the sharp-eyed matrons who monitored every interaction for signs of impropriety or romantic development. When the orchestra announced the first waltz of the evening, Sinclair approached Evangeline with a request for the honor of her hand in dance, a request that she could not refuse without causing comment yet dare not accept without consequences. The waltz represented both liberation and danger for aristocratic ladies, its intimate embrace and synchronized movements creating opportunities for private conversation and physical contact that would have been scandalous in any other context. As Sinclair's hand settled at Evangeline's waist and their gloved fingers intertwined, the electric current that had sparked between them in the library intensified into something that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. They moved together with a natural rhythm that suggested a deeper compatibility, while their conversation, conducted in low tones beneath the music, carried undercurrents of meaning that transformed innocent words into declarations of mutual attraction. Under the cover of the dance, Sinclair spoke of his plans to establish a permanent residence in England, describing a country estate he had recently purchased that required a woman's touch to transform it from a bachelor establishment into a proper home. His descriptions of gardens that needed tending and rooms that awaited decoration carried obvious implications about his matrimonial intentions, while his questions about her own dreams and aspirations revealed a man who valued intellectual companionship as much as physical beauty. When he mentioned his desire to travel the world with someone who shared his curiosity about distant cultures and exotic landscapes, Evangeline felt her carefully constructed world of duty and obligation begin to crumble around her. The social dynamics of the ballroom created numerous obstacles to their private conversation, as propriety demanded that Evangeline distribute her attention among multiple partners throughout the evening. She danced with Lord Pemberton's eldest son, a tedious young man whose conversation centered entirely on hunting and his prospects for inheriting the family title, followed by the heir to a neighboring estate whose nervous stutter and obvious discomfort made their time together an ordeal for both participants. Each subsequent partner only emphasized the rare quality of her connection with Sinclair, whose combination of intellectual sophistication, worldly experience, and obvious attraction to her created a standard that no other gentleman could hope to match. Between dances, the elaborate social ritual of the supper interval provided additional opportunities for strategic positioning and carefully orchestrated encounters that appeared casual while serving specific purposes in the complex game of aristocratic courtship. Sinclair managed to secure the seat beside Evangeline at one of the smaller tables arranged throughout the mansion's dining room, where the conversation flowed as freely as the imported champagne while they sampled delicacies prepared by the Pemberton family's French chef. Their discussion ranged from literature to philosophy to travel, revealing shared interests and compatible perspectives that transcended the superficial connections typically forged at such gatherings. The turning point of the evening arrived when Mrs. Pemberton, with the subtle cruelty that characterized society matrons, made a pointed reference to the financial difficulties facing certain ancient families who might soon find themselves compelled to consider matches that prioritized economic security over romantic inclination. Her words, delivered with a smile that failed to conceal their malicious intent, created a moment of excruciating silence during which every person at the table understood the target of her observation. Evangeline's composure wavered for the first time that evening, color draining from her cheeks as the reality of her situation was exposed to public scrutiny. Sinclair's response demonstrated both his quick intelligence and his protective instincts toward Evangeline, as he smoothly redirected the conversation toward his own experiences with the practical aspects of marriage in different cultures, describing matrimonial customs he had observed during his travels that emphasized compatibility and mutual respect over purely financial considerations. His words carried subtle criticism of English society's mercenary approach to marriage, while offering implicit support for Evangeline's right to make her own choices regarding her future. The message was not lost on the assembled company, who recognized in Sinclair a man willing to challenge social conventions when they conflicted with his personal convictions. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion with the final set of country dances, Sinclair requested the honor of escorting Evangeline onto the terrace for a breath of fresh air, a request that she accepted despite knowing that such private moments were fraught with danger for an unmarried lady's reputation. The terrace overlooked formal gardens illuminated by strategically placed torches that created pools of golden light amidst mysterious shadows, while the distant sound of music and laughter from the ballroom provided a romantic backdrop for what both understood might be their last opportunity for private conversation. Under the star-filled sky of an English summer night, with the perfume of roses heavy in the warm air and the gentle sound of a fountain providing musical accompaniment to their words, Sinclair finally gave voice to the feelings that had been building between them since their first meeting. He spoke of the loneliness of his years abroad, the emptiness of wealth without someone to share it, and his growing conviction that fate had guided him to Raven's Hollow for the specific purpose of meeting her. When he took her hands in his and spoke of his desire to offer her not just his fortune but his complete devotion, Evangeline found herself faced with a choice between the security of conformity and the terrifying freedom of following her heart into an uncertain but passionate future. The moonlit terrace became a stage for declarations that would forever alter the carefully ordered world that Lady Evangeline had known since birth, as Alexander Sinclair's passionate words hung in the perfumed air between them like invisible chains that both bound and liberated her from the constraints of aristocratic expectation. His proposal transcended the calculated negotiations that typically characterized matrimonial arrangements among the nobility, offering instead a partnership based on genuine affection, intellectual compatibility, and shared dreams that extended far beyond England's shores. Yet even as her heart soared at the prospect of escape from her gilded cage, the rational part of her mind catalogued the social and financial obstacles that made such a union fraught with complications that could destroy them both. Sinclair's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his waistcoat to withdraw a small velvet box containing a ring that bore no resemblance to the traditional family heirlooms typically exchanged during aristocratic betrothals. The emerald that caught the moonlight had been mined in Ceylon under his personal supervision, its exceptional clarity and fire reflecting his determination to offer her something unique and personal rather than merely valuable. When he placed the ring on her finger with words of eternal devotion, Evangeline felt the last barriers around her heart crumble, yet she could not suppress the voice of conscience that whispered warnings about the price of such happiness. Their embrace beneath the summer stars carried all the passion that had been building between them since their first meeting, yet it also represented a point of no return that neither fully comprehended in the intoxicating moment of mutual surrender. The kiss they shared tasted of champagne and rebellion, of exotic adventures and dangerous possibilities that existed far beyond the approved boundaries of English society. When they finally drew apart, both breathless and transformed, they understood that they had crossed an invisible line that separated them forever from the safe mediocrity of conventional expectations. The spell of romantic isolation was shattered by the unexpected appearance of Lord Pemberton's eldest son, whose own romantic hopes regarding Lady Evangeline had been frustrated throughout the evening by her obvious preference for Sinclair's company. His presence on the terrace at such a private moment created a scandal that could not be ignored or explained away, as social convention demanded that any unmarried lady discovered in such circumstances had compromised her reputation beyond redemption. The young man's stammered apologies and hasty retreat could not undo the damage of his observation, which would inevitably become fodder for the gossip networks that sustained aristocratic society's appetite for dramatic downfalls. Within moments of their return to the ballroom, the subtle but unmistakable signs of scandal began to manifest themselves in the carefully controlled expressions and whispered conversations that followed their movements. Mrs. Pemberton's sharp eyes missed nothing as she observed the telltale signs of intimate contact between her guests, while other matrons exchanged meaningful glances that communicated volumes about the social consequences that would attend such behavior. The evening that had begun with such promise now threatened to become the catalyst for Evangeline's complete social ruin, as the rigid moral code that governed aristocratic conduct allowed no tolerance for even the appearance of impropriety. The carriage ride back to Raven's Hollow provided a brief sanctuary where Evangeline could contemplate the magnitude of the choice she faced, as the emerald ring hidden beneath her glove seemed to burn against her skin with the weight of its implications. Her maid Sarah, whose loyalty transcended the boundaries between servant and mistress, offered silent support through meaningful glances and gentle touches that conveyed her understanding of the impossible situation her beloved lady now confronted. The approaching lights of the estate reminded Evangeline that mourning would bring consequences that could not be avoided or delayed through wishful thinking. The following dawn brought a stream of visitors whose ostensible purpose was to inquire about Evangeline's health, but whose true mission involved gathering intelligence about the previous evening's events and their potential implications for county society. Mrs. Whitmore arrived first with her characteristic blend of false sympathy and barely concealed malice, followed by a succession of lesser matrons, whose questions probed deeper into the details of what had transpired between Lady Evangeline and the mysterious Mr. Sinclair. Each conversation became an interrogation disguised as social concern, while the cumulative effect created a pressure that threatened to crush Evangeline beneath the weight of community disapproval. The crisis deepened when a formal letter arrived from the family solicitors requesting an immediate conference regarding urgent matters related to the Blackwood estate's financial situation. The timing of this summons, coming so soon after the ballroom scandal, suggested that Evangeline's creditors had been monitoring her social activities and now perceived an opportunity to accelerate their collection efforts. The possibility that her romantic rebellion might trigger the complete collapse of her family's fortune added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Sinclair's own position became increasingly precarious as representatives of established county families made discreet inquiries into his background, business dealings, and true intentions regarding Lady Evangeline. The investigations revealed aspects of his past that he had hoped to keep private, including questionable associations with trading companies whose practices skirted the edges of legal acceptability and romantic entanglements in foreign ports that suggested a man whose moral standards differed significantly from those expected in English society. While none of these revelations constituted actual scandal, they provided ammunition for those who sought to discredit his suit and protect what they perceived as the natural order of aristocratic privilege. The pressure intensified when Lady Evangeline received an unexpected visit from her cousin Edmund, whose inheritance of the Blackwood estates depended upon her remaining unmarried or making a match that he could control for his own benefit. His crude threats and obvious avarice revealed the extent to which her personal happiness had become subordinated to others' financial interests, while his intimate knowledge of the family's debts and obligations demonstrated that any decision she made would have consequences extending far beyond her own fate. The conversation devolved into open hostility when she refused to consider his proposed solution of a marriage to one of his business associates who would assume the estate's debts in exchange for access to her social connections. The emotional toll of these mounting pressures began to manifest itself in physical symptoms that could not be hidden from the observant eyes of those who watched for any sign of weakness or vulnerability. Evangeline's usually flawless complexion showed signs of sleepless nights and emotional strain, while her composed demeanor occasionally cracked to reveal the desperation that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained self-control. The servants at Raven's Hollow moved through their duties with the subdued efficiency that characterized households facing uncertain futures, their loyalty to the family tempered by concerns about their own security should the estate change hands. In the midst of this gathering storm, a cryptic note arrived from Sinclair requesting a private meeting at the ruins of an ancient abbey that stood on the border between their properties. A location that would provide both the privacy necessary for frank discussion and the symbolic resonance of a place where other desperate lovers had once sought sanctuary from the harsh realities of their respective worlds. The message contained only an address and a time, yet its urgency communicated the gravity of the decision that could no longer be postponed or avoided through conventional means. As evening shadows lengthened across the manicured lawns of Raven's Hollow, Lady Evangeline faced the most crucial choice of her life, whether to honor the obligations that bound her to a dying social order or to embrace the uncertain freedom that love offered, even if that choice meant sacrificing everything she had been raised to value and protect. The weight of centuries of family tradition pressed upon her like a physical burden, yet the memory of Sinclair's passionate words and the promise of his devotion offered a vision of happiness that seemed worth any sacrifice required to achieve it. The ancient abbey ruins stood like ghostly sentinels against the star-filled sky, their Gothic arches and crumbling stonework bearing witness to centuries of human passion and divine devotion that had ultimately succumbed to the relentless passage of time. Ivy-covered walls that had once housed prayers and sacred rituals now provided sanctuary for a different kind of communion. As Lady Evangeline made her way through the moonlit countryside toward a rendezvous that would either secure her happiness or ensure her complete destruction. The abandoned chapel, with its roofless nave open to the heavens and its altar stones worn smooth by weather and neglect, seemed an appropriate setting for confessions that transcended the boundaries of conventional morality. Sinclair awaited her arrival with the restless energy of a man whose entire future hung in the balance. His dark silhouette moving among the ruins like a figure from one of the Gothic novels that ladies read in secret despite their family's disapproval. When their eyes met across the consecrated ground where monks had once chanted their devotions, the electricity between them seemed to charge the very air with possibilities that both thrilled and terrified them. The isolation of their meeting place emphasized the magnitude of the step they contemplated, as any discovery of their midnight assignation would provide irrefutable proof of the moral transgression that society would never forgive or forget. The conversation that followed revealed truths that daylight meetings and social conventions had prevented them from acknowledging. As Sinclair spoke with raw honesty about the desperate loneliness that had driven him across oceans in search of something he could not name until he found it in her eyes. His confession of love transcended mere romantic declaration to become a complete surrender of his carefully constructed emotional defenses, while his detailed descriptions of the life he envisioned sharing with her painted pictures of exotic adventures and intimate companionship that made their current predicament seem like a temporary obstacle rather than an insurmountable barrier. Evangeline's own revelations carried equal weight as she described the suffocating constraints of aristocratic existence, the crushing pressure to sacrifice personal desires for family obligations, and the growing certainty that marriage to any acceptable suitor would constitute a form of living death that would slowly extinguish everything vital and authentic within her nature. Her words tumbled forth like water from a broken dam, releasing years of suppressed resentment and frustrated longing that had found no acceptable outlet within the rigid structure of her prescribed role as dutiful daughter and potential bride. The physical dimension of their attraction could no longer be denied or controlled as they stood together in the ruined chapel, their proximity creating a magnetic field that drew them inexorably closer despite the rational awareness of danger that flickered at the edges of their consciousness. When Sinclair traced the line of her jaw with fingers that trembled with barely restrained passion, Evangeline felt her entire body respond with sensations that her sheltered upbringing had never prepared her to experience or understand. The kiss that followed carried all the desperate intensity of lovers who understood that they might never have another opportunity to express their feelings without the weight of social consequences crushing their newfound happiness. Their embrace beneath the open sky transformed the ruined abbey into a cathedral of passion where conventional morality held no authority, and only the truth of their mutual desire possessed any significance. The ancient stones that surrounded them had witnessed centuries of human drama, from the sacred vows of medieval monks to the secret meetings of other lovers who had sought refuge from societies that demanded conformity over happiness. In this timeless setting, Evangeline and Sinclair discovered a connection that transcended the artificial boundaries created by birth, wealth, and social position to touch something fundamental and eternal within their souls. The spell of romantic isolation was broken by the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats that announced the arrival of unwelcome observers whose presence would transform their private moment into a public scandal with consequences that neither could escape or control. The riders proved to be agents employed by Evangeline's cousin Edmund, whose suspicious nature and financial interests had prompted him to have her movements monitored with the thoroughness typically reserved for criminal investigations. Their discovery of the midnight meeting provided the evidence he needed to justify legal action that would strip her of any remaining autonomy and place her completely under his guardianship. The confrontation that followed revealed the full extent of the conspiracy that had been developing around Evangeline's fate, as Edmund's representatives made it clear that they possessed detailed knowledge of her financial difficulties, romantic entanglements, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to serve his purposes. The threats they delivered carried the weight of legal authority backed by social convention, making it clear that any continued defiance would result in complete ruin not only for herself but for anyone who attempted to assist her in resisting their demands. Sinclair's response to these threats demonstrated both his courage and his understanding of the forces arrayed against them, as he offered to meet Edmund's financial demands in exchange for Evangeline's freedom, while simultaneously making it clear that he would not be intimidated by crude attempts at blackmail or coercion. His willingness to sacrifice his own fortune to protect her revealed the depth of his commitment, yet it also highlighted the fundamental impossibility of their situation within the existing social framework that governed aristocratic life. The return journey to Raven's Hollow took place in circumstances that emphasized their powerlessness against the machinery of family obligation and social control, as Edmund's agents maintained a visible escort that served both as protection and imprisonment. The lights of the estate that had once represented security and belonging now appeared as the illumination of a prison where Evangeline would be held until she submitted to the marriage arrangements that would restore the family fortune while ensuring her personal misery. The final hours before dawn brought a succession of revelations and ultimatums that left no doubt about the consequences of continued resistance to Edmund's plans, as legal documents were produced that demonstrated his authority to make binding decisions about both her person and her property. The marriage contract he presented for her signature bore the name of a wealthy merchant whose social aspirations included the acquisition of aristocratic connections through matrimonial alliance, a man whose character and appearance made the prospect of intimate contact repugnant to every refined sensibility she possessed. The pressure mounted as servants loyal to Edmund rather than to the family's traditional values began appearing throughout Raven's Hollow, their presence serving as a constant reminder that her former life of relative freedom had ended and a new era of complete subjugation had begun. The gradual replacement of trusted staff members with individuals whose loyalty belonged to her cousin rather than to herself eliminated the support network that might have provided assistance or comfort during her final hours of decision. Sarah's tearful farewell, conducted under the watchful eyes of Edmund's representatives, provided the last emotional anchor to her former existence as the faithful maid who had served her since childhood was dismissed without ceremony or adequate provision for her future welfare. The casual cruelty of this action revealed Edmund's character more clearly than any words could have done, while the helplessness she felt at being unable to protect someone who had shown her nothing but devotion demonstrated the complete transformation of her circumstances from protected heiress to powerless dependent. As morning light began to filter through the windows of Regencial's elegant rooms, Lady Evangeline faced the stark reality that her romantic rebellion had not only failed to secure her happiness but had provided the pretext for her complete subjugation to forces that regarded her merely as an asset to be deployed for maximum financial advantage. The emerald ring that had once symbolized hope and possibility now seemed to mock her naive belief that love could triumph over the brutal realities of aristocratic economics and family politics. The approaching sunrise that had once promised another day of possibility now heralded the beginning of what might well be her last hours of freedom, as the marriage ceremony that would seal her fate had been scheduled for noon in the estate's private chapel, ensuring that her capitulation would take place within sight of the family portraits whose painted eyes had witnessed 3 centuries of Blackwood triumphs and tragedies. The morning of what was intended to be Lady Evangeline's wedding day dawned with an ethereal beauty that seemed to mock the tragedy unfolding within Regencial's ancestral walls, as golden sunlight streamed through the tall windows to illuminate preparations for a ceremony that represented the complete destruction of her dreams and autonomy. The chapel that had witnessed generations of Blackwood marriages was being transformed into a stage for what amounted to a legal kidnapping disguised as holy matrimony, while servants moved through their duties with the grim efficiency of undertakers preparing for a funeral rather than a celebration. Edmund's chosen bridegroom arrived precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning, his appearance confirming Evangeline's worst fears about the man who would soon possess legal authority over every aspect of her existence. Mr. Thaddeus Grimsby bore the unmistakable marks of a life devoted to the accumulation of wealth through methods that prioritized profit over principle. his calculating eyes and grasping manner revealing a character that would regard marriage not as a partnership, but as a business acquisition requiring strict management and absolute control. His crude attempts at gallantry during their brief introduction demonstrated his complete lack of understanding regarding the sensibilities of the woman he intended to possess. The legal representatives who accompanied Grimsby carried documents that revealed the true scope of the transaction being disguised as matrimony, as the marriage settlement transferred not only Evangeline's person but the entirety of her remaining assets to her new husband's control while providing minimal protection for her own welfare or comfort. The financial arrangements that Edmund had negotiated ensured his own enrichment, while reducing Evangeline to the status of an expensive ornament, whose value lay primarily in the social connections she could provide to a man seeking entry into aristocratic circles. In the final hours before the ceremony, as Evangeline sat in her childhood bedroom surrounded by the familiar objects that had defined her sheltered existence, she made a desperate decision that would either secure her freedom or ensure her complete destruction. The letter she penned with trembling hands contained not only a complete confession of her love for Alexander Sinclair but detailed revelations about Edmund's fraudulent manipulation of the family finances, his forged documents, and his conspiracy to engineer her downfall for his own financial benefit. The missive was addressed to the Lord Chancellor himself, whose authority superseded local magistrates and whose reputation for justice offered her only remaining hope for intervention. Sarah's midnight return to Raven's Hollow, facilitated by loyal servants who had refused Edmund's attempts to purchase their allegiance, provided the means for delivering this crucial communication to London with a speed that only desperation could inspire. The faithful maid's willingness to risk arrest or worse punishment in order to serve her beloved mistress demonstrated the kind of loyalty that transcended monetary consideration, while her intimate knowledge of the estate's hidden passages and forgotten doorways enabled her to move unseen despite the increased security measures that Edmund had implemented. The ceremony itself began with all the traditional pomp that aristocratic weddings demanded, yet the absence of genuine celebration was evident in the forced smiles and uncomfortable silences that characterized the assembled guests who understood they were witnessing coercion rather than romance. Evangeline's entrance into the chapel, dressed in her mother's wedding gown but wearing the demeanor of a condemned prisoner approaching execution, created an atmosphere of tragic solemnity that no amount of flowers or music could dispel. The dramatic interruption arrived at the moment when the clergyman asked if anyone present knew of any lawful impediment to the proposed marriage, as the chapel doors burst open to admit a contingent of the Lord Chancellor's personal representatives, accompanied by Alexander Sinclair, whose presence transformed the entire dynamic of the situation. The legal documents they carried bore the authority of the Crown itself, while their announcement that Edmund was under investigation for fraud and embezzlement sent shockwaves through the assembled guests who suddenly realized they had been unwitting participants in an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The revelations that followed exposed the full extent of Edmund's villainy, as forensic examination of the family finances revealed systematic theft and manipulation that had artificially created the crisis he had exploited to justify his seizure of control over Evangeline's fate. The documents that had appeared to demonstrate her desperate need for a financially advantageous marriage proved to be clever forgeries designed to support his fraudulent claims, while the genuine accounting revealed that the Blackwood estates remained substantially solvent despite the challenges posed by debts accumulated during her father's illness. Sinclair's role in exposing Edmund's crimes extended beyond romantic devotion to include methodical investigation conducted with the thoroughness that had made him successful in international commerce, as his contacts within London's financial community had enabled him to trace the network of false transactions and forged documents that supported the fraudulent narrative of family insolvency. His willingness to risk his own reputation and resources to secure evidence of criminal activity demonstrated a commitment that transcended mere romantic infatuation to encompass genuine respect for justice and truth. The immediate arrest of Edmund and his co-conspirators, including the complicit Grimsby whose own questionable business practices had attracted the attention of Crown investigators, transformed the intended wedding into a courtroom drama that would provide gossip for county society for generations to come. The spectacle of seeing a member of the nobility led away in chains served as a powerful reminder that even aristocratic privilege could not protect those who betrayed the fundamental principles of honor and honesty that supposedly governed their class. The legal proceedings that followed would eventually result in the complete restoration of Evangeline's rights and property, along with substantial compensation for the emotional distress and financial manipulation she had endured. Yet the immediate effect of her liberation was to restore not only her freedom but her faith in the possibility that justice could prevail over corruption when truth was courageously spoken and defended by those with the power to enforce moral standards. The private ceremony that took place 6 months later in the restored chapel at Ravenshollow bore no resemblance to the coercive spectacle that had been interrupted by legal intervention, as Lady Evangeline Blackwood became Mrs. Alexander Sinclair in a celebration that united not only two hearts but two fortunes dedicated to purposes far beyond personal gratification. Their marriage settlement, negotiated between equals rather than imposed by economic desperation, created a partnership that would span continents and decades while maintaining the integrity that had brought them together. The honeymoon journey that carried them to the exotic destinations Sinclair had described during their courtship fulfilled Evangeline's dreams of experiencing the broader world beyond England's shores, while their collaborative efforts to manage both their English estates and his international trading concerns created a model of matrimonial cooperation that challenged conventional assumptions about gender roles and capabilities. Their correspondence with friends and family described adventures and discoveries that enriched both their understanding of different cultures and their appreciation for the privileges and responsibilities that accompanied their elevated social position. The legacy of their romance extended beyond personal happiness to influence the next generation of aristocratic marriages, as their example demonstrated that genuine compatibility and mutual respect provided stronger foundations for lasting partnership than purely financial considerations or social convenience. The children who eventually graced their union inherited not only substantial material advantages, but the more valuable gift of parents whose relationship exemplified the possibility of combining passionate love with practical wisdom. The transformation of Ravenshollow under Evangeline's renewed stewardship, supported by Sinclair's business acumen and international connections, demonstrated that proper management could restore even seriously damaged estates to prosperity and influence. The charity work they sponsored, the educational opportunities they provided for deserving young people regardless of birth, and their patronage of arts and sciences created a lasting positive impact that extended far beyond their immediate family or social circle. The final judgment of history would record their story as more than a mere romantic triumph, recognizing instead their contribution to the gradual evolution of English society toward greater emphasis on individual merit and personal choice rather than rigid adherence to inherited privilege and predetermined social roles. The precedent they established encouraged other young people to seek marriages based on genuine affection and compatibility, while their success provided proof that such unions could achieve both personal happiness and social benefit when founded upon shared values and mutual commitment to worthy purposes. In the quiet moments of their later years, when the passions of youth had mellowed into the deeper satisfaction of lives well lived together, Evangeline and Alexander would often return to the abbey ruins where their love had first been fully acknowledged and declared. The ancient stones that had witnessed their midnight confession continued to stand as monuments to the enduring power of truth and courage, while the chapel at Ravenshollow echoed with the laughter of their children and grandchildren, who carried forward the legacy of a love that had overcome every obstacle society could devise to prevent its fulfillment. Their story became a testament to the truth that authentic happiness could only be achieved when individuals possessed the courage to reject false choices imposed by others, and instead embrace the risks and rewards of following their hearts toward destinations that honor both personal integrity and genuine human connection. The encounter that had once threatened to end a lineage had instead ensured its continuation through the most worthy possible means. The union of two souls whose love transcended every barrier except their own unwavering commitment to each other and the principles that had brought them together against impossible odds.